Hello, you're listening to a bonus episode of the Humane podcast. My name is Polly Creed and I'm writer and co-producer of Humane, a new play running at the Pleasance Theatre in Islington this month until the 21st of November. It's supported by Arts Council England and the Cochrane Foundation. Humane tells the true story of Brightlingsea in Essex. In 1995, this tiny coastal Essex town blockaded itself for 10 months in protest against live animal exports, a trade they deemed cruel and repugnant. It deals with a number of interconnected, timely issues such as animal rights, motherhood, activism, isolation, and the lack of intersectionality within the environmental movement. It's about rural communities and the question of where our food comes from. Back in spring 2021, I sat down to talk to Louise Jameson, who starred as Bev in the audio drama version of the play, which was recorded in lockdown. Louise has been lighting up our screens and stages for 50 years. She's perhaps best known for playing Italian matriarch Rosa Di Marco in TV's EastEnders, and also starring in Doctor Who, Tenko and Bergerac. Louise is also an inveterate activist, championing a range of different issues including prison reform, CND and better representation of women on screen. She was even there at the Greenham Common Peace Camp. There couldn't be a more perfect person, therefore, to speak to about the relationship between theatre and social change, acting and activism. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, Louise, and thank you so much for speaking to us today.
Well, thank you. I'm incredibly impressed with the script and your passion, and you're just not giving up because of the pandemic, making it happen. All credit to you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a long road, but there've been massive kind of silver linings, actually, I think, in kind of learning about a new medium. I don't think we would ever have kind of done it as a radio play if it hadn't been for the pandemic. And it's been lovely. Every week I kind of get the insights from the podcast platform, and I can see people listening in different parts of the world, which is just really lovely. And something, as I say before, it would have really been kind of confined to just London, which is lovely, being in the room with people, but actually to reach audiences in all sorts of different places and kind of people maybe that wouldn't otherwise be able to get to a theatre feels really wonderful.
And it's not necessarily the end of the road anyway. I'm sure this will open doors for all kinds of other theatre, film, radio, podcasts, whatever. I think you'll open a little floodgate. I hope you do.
Well, we're hoping to, I don't even want to jinx it, but we're hoping to open the stage play in sort of autumn 2021 at the Pleasance. So we'll hope there are no kind of other variants or anything that kind of sidetracks that. But that should be really wonderful. And it's nice to kind of dive into different forms, and it's been kind of allowing us to tell the story in different ways, which is really lovely. So I'd love to kind of begin by asking you, so kind of as I mentioned in the introduction, you've really been involved with kind of both acting and activism, and I wondered kind of for you whether you've seen a big change over the last 50 years in the relationship between sort of social activism and the arts, and kind of what stands out as kind of the biggest shift in terms of that.
Such an interesting question. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I went on every single march, anti-Vietnam, apartheid, ban the bomb. I was just there championing for change all the time. And then I became a mum, and then along came Thatcher's children, born in the 80s, my two boys included, with very little political engagement, despite the fact, I have one black child, one white child. They have different fathers. And my white son is half South African, and my black son is half West Indian. And they did engage with apartheid, not buying the grapes and that, going to the concert when he was finally freed. But that's kind of as far as it went. They didn't feel a personal connection to all the other stuff that was going on and still does go on. But I see this next generation now, the millennials, really engaging. And I wonder if that isn't to do with the influence of the teachers of the time, especially when it comes to pollution and global warming. There seems to be an enormous movement in and around that. And like yourself, responsible eating. I mean, that seems such a trite phrase for the enormity of what you're trying to bring to the surface here. You're trying to raise awareness of. But responsible eating would change so much in the world.
It's a good way of putting it as well, kind of responsible eating, because sometimes, we talk about sustainability, we talk about kind of cruelty-free products and all of those things, but actually the idea of being responsible and, it being quite interconnected and thinking about, the all the different kind of facets of ethical eating and what that is. So, I mean, when we were talking about this play, I keep kind of coming back and thinking, to me, it feels like it is also about, it's very much focused on the story about the live exports. But for me, it also feels like it's about climate. It feels like it's about sustainability. It's that question of where our food comes from, and also the injustice of that sort of being visible. So that idea, I think that, the play is about this community who are, it's brought to their attention because there's one road in, one road out, and the animals have to come past their windows, come past their schools, and there's no way of escaping it. And I wonder if what you're saying about that shift as well is about visibility and the fact that, these as kind of all the kind of social crises, as the climate crisis has worsened and become visible to us, if it's become kind of impossible to ignore.
And of course, as the net has grown and the means of communication has grown, and news that has been suppressed can't be suppressed the way it used to be, all that has made it more visible as well. And I do think, I think the second half of your question, the overriding force of storytelling is that it's a safe place to debate dangerous issues. And you can have a conversation which doesn't involve confrontation. It just involves education and the engaging of emotion.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. And it feels like in the age of sort of Twitter, it's ever more important that we have, places where you can have more nuanced discussion. So again, kind of going back to Humane, I think the play really started out and it was about, that you sort of celebrating the voices and the stories that largely it was a mix of men and women, but the women that were involved with these kind of organising these protests. But it became about so many issues. And even just as I was interviewing people, there were kind of all sorts of, realising that it was a really brilliant issue that people were there for, but there were all sorts of different kind of agendas, different people there for different reasons. Some of them brilliant and kind of even if it wasn't about the animal cruelty, but there for kind of the community, there to think about eating more locally and all of those things. And then, but there are also all sorts of things, and even kind of, it was 1995, but Brexit kind of lurked in the background of a lot of those things. And one of the MPs that was most vocal in support of the protesters was Bernard Jenkin. And at the time, it was very much, he positioned that as about animal cruelty. But looking back on it, it's kind of interesting to consider if it was also about exports to Europe. So I loved being able to create something that was, celebrating the story, really talking about the power of activism, thinking about the planet, but also had all these kind of knotty and kind of complicated factors to it, which I think is reflective of kind of probably where we are at the moment as well.
I think through the whole of the generations, I'm old enough to be your grandma. So, over the three generations, what has changed most markedly is the gender politics, and that it isn't all being whipped up by a particular group, be it a male-based military group or a female-based domestic group. Now those edges are much more blurred, and you see both sexes, or whatever you identify as, just being part and parcel of the movement, regardless of gender, which is fantastic.
That's really interesting, and something I probably have really taken for granted as well.
Yeah.
That I think that's really fascinating. And as I say, this in Brightlingsea, it was a mix of men and women. It was mostly sort of pensioners, because people say, when I ask people, it's because it was the people that were able to be there physically every day. They had the time to be there. But it is interesting to think about it, as it still was kind of through the channel of that, domestic world, I think. How do you think that's changed sort of outcomes and the tools that activists use?
Oh, it's tricky, isn't it? It's kind of, it has to be it has to be speculation. I think probably, yes, it has. I think women have felt more and more empowered. The whole female mutilation, that genital mutilation, that's become very much in the fore now, being championed by women, is also got the backing of a lot of men, which is, fantastic. Back in the day, that probably wouldn't have happened. So yes, I do think it, because like it or lump it, men are still in a position of power. So the more all embracing we can be with any kind of activism, of course, the more strands you're going to get of influence over the people that can make change.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea of allyship as well.
Yes.
Is kind of, is so powerful. In terms of the pandemic, do you think I know we were kind of just talking before we started recording about kind of the world of doing Zoom interviews and self-tapes and everything in lockdown. Do you think, in terms of, I guess, both the arts and also activism is a huge question, but do you have a sense of kind of where things are moving to?
I'm not sure they'll move. I think they'll expand. I don't think you'll ever lose again, we were saying this before, the ancient art of storytelling, of, sitting by your child's sleepy face and reading them a story is the beginning of it all, really, or sitting round the campfire telling stories, or people on a stage talk to a larger audience, and so it grows and grows and grows. So I think all we have done is added medium, and we've added, I think, which is fantastic, the ability for somebody with relatively little experience can now make a movie. So when you're not heard, when the powers that be don't come to you with their thousands of pounds going, let me make this movie for you, you can go, right, we'll just do it ourselves then, albeit on a budget, but we can do it.
Yeah, and I guess there's a parallel there with activism as well. It's that thing of, like, now you don't have to be a lobby group with, I think it's a lot easier to do things just by yourself. And yeah. I think even, I'm pretty young, but even I can see the people that are kind of at school now, so teenagers who are maybe 10 years younger than me, it feels like they are really just doing things. So, I'd always kind of wait for a teacher or something to organise something or to be asked, and it feels like they're just making it themselves. And I think that's what we're seeing in the arts as well, and other industries. But I think particularly in those two areas, it's kind of really being brought to the surface, that ability to kind of DIY it.
Yes. If you're not heard, then you find a voice somewhere. There's so many outlets.
Just quickly, kind of going back a bit to Humane.
Yes.
Was this a story that you were familiar with? Do you remember kind of seing the story of Brightlingsea on the news?
I'm ashamed to say it was new to me, or if I did know it, I lost it in the mists of time. But I mean, what a fantastic story! And how did you get hold of it in the first place?
So I grew up really close to Brightlingsea in Essex, and my friend, so it all kind of began when I was sort of, as we're talking about, sort of teenagers at school. At school, my best friend Daisy Blower, who's now the most fantastic set designer, she came to school one day. She was talking about her granny Betty, who'd been involved in these protests, and she'd been saying, "Oh, I really want to do a verbatim project around it," and we kind of had a few moments where we sort of, I think Daisy shakily went to kind of around the hairdressers and things in Brightlingsea and recorded it on her sort of Motorola phone. And then we kind of lost sight of it as sort of teenagers do. And then a few years later, I saw a call out for plays about Essex, and I thought, I can think of a really brilliant story, and I've really forgotten about it. And then it kind of came flashing back, and sort of I started doing more research and realised there was so much there. And I spoke to Daisy and said, "Oh, Daisy, do you want to should we kind of resurrect the Brightlingsea project?" And she said, "Well, I'm not a writer, I'm a designer. So if you write it, then I'll design it." So she's going to be designing the stage play.
Oh, fantastic.
But it's quite nice because it kind of comes, like it feels like it's kind of come from that sort of community in a way.
Yeah.
And so all the audio dramas are dedicated to the memory of her grandma Betty, who was there in Brightlingsea at the time. And it's nice for me doing, my family aren't originally from Essex, but the plays really helped me kind of connect to that community that I kind of grew up in. And kind of, especially we were talking about sort of stereotypes and things. I think often, the idea of Essex girls and something.
I'm an Essex girl.
Yeah, it's really like I kind of really sort of probably rejected it at points and was really, but actually really realizing the kind of the grit and the sort of activism that was happening there. What do you think about the sort of? Have you struggled with the stereotype of the Essex girl?
No, I've embraced it really. I'm from Essex, innit? It's just as kind of I slightly sent it up myself. But my grandfather was the self-made man from the East End that moved out to Epping Forest way. It's a very typical story. My mum was born within the sound of Bow Bells, which makes her a true Cockney. And then they made a conscious decision to, I put this in quotes, jump class. And I'm taught how to lay the table properly and go to elocution classes. And, they made a real determined effort. They voted Tory. They were, so I think I probably slightly broke their hearts when I emerged with all these left-wing politics, having had the privileged private education, to then come out and say everybody should be state educated. These things I believe in.
I could, it's all kind of connected, isn't it? But I wonder as well, as I was researching it, there was that story that you talk about, people kind of Cockney people moving out to sort of places like Brightlingsea and Colchester, and a lot of that was to do with all sorts of things, kind of people looking for more space, but also gentrification, kind of what was happening with I guess, from the 50s through to the kind of 80s in the East End as well. And I think I wonder if there's something as well about, I keep coming back to why did this happen in Brightlingsea? And I wonder if there's something about that kind of, a sense of sort of trade unions and kind of collective action that maybe informed the protests in Brightlingsea.
I think you're probably right. I mean, you've done far more research on it than I have, obviously, but I think women found a voice during the two world wars in a way that they never had before, and an idea of self-worth and the ability to speak out. And as you say, this pensioner woman that you're championing, that you're dedicating the piece to, probably wouldn't have had that voice had it not been for the two world wars and the moving out. All those adverts that said, make the bullets, plough the land, get yourself out there, take on the man's work. They tried to reverse it at the end of the war with your man needs you back in the home, get back into, and a lot of women just went, no, I've had a taste of what it's like to be out there with a career now. And I think that was the beginning of feminism, even though it wasn't really championed until the, late 70s in this country. But, there she was. Betty, did you say her name was?
Yeah, Betty Blower.
Betty Blower, there she was.
Yeah.
Blowing her trumpet. Good for her.
Yeah, exactly. And there were so many, there was an amazing story of this woman, Tilly Merritt, as well, who was, I think, 76 at the time, and she was squirting the police with her garden hose and, and I think that's also why I was really attracted to it is, we hear all these stories about activism with sort of young people. And at the moment as well, amazingly, people like Greta Thunberg and things kind of are there. But I hadn't kind of really heard as many stories about older women, especially sort of taking things into their own hands in this way. And I know there are so many stories like this, but I feel like the media traditionally hasn't sort of picked up on those. They haven't been given space. And I kind of just love that. And I love the intergenerational aspect of it. And I mean, the protests were really led by a woman called Maria Wilby, but her mum was and kind of still is kind of a huge figure of compassion and wild farming. And it was sort of the intergenerational knowledge and kind of that really, I suppose that was also one of the catalysts for it, and the fact that this and her sister Francesca as well, the kind of the three of them were huge sort of leaders of it.
So this was all female led then?
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much. There was a group of men that were very involved. As I say again, mostly sort of pensioners, but it was really, I think, because of the demographics as well of kind of the pensioners that were in Brightley. So it was lots of women, and I also think, as you were saying, I think it was sort of. It was seen through quite a domestic lens, and a lot of the people, when I was interviewing people, they kept coming back to this issue of the schools, the two schools, and the fact that the lorries passed by the schools, and that was sort of, I think there were all sorts of reasons why people opposed it, but that was the most common reason that people gave, and I thought that was really interesting that it was, and maybe as well for people. Women, when they're protesting, there's often a need to kind of talk about it in terms of children and motherhood and all of those things.
Do you think if there had been another road, do you think that there wouldn't have been these protests?
I don't know. It's hard to imagine kind of the difference in the geography. I think just the fact that they. Yeah, maybe if, I don't know. I think one of the things is people being able to see it so clearly being at eye level. I mean, even I remember, well, and it still has an impact, but I think you used to see a lot more of it, of kind of lorries or motorways with, you see the animals kind of looking out of the
little noses poking out there.
Yeah, and I mean, I turned vegetarian when I was a very headstrong child, probably 9 or 10. And I think seeing animals like that was one of the, and I kind of grew up in the countryside, so it was kind of seeing the lambs in the fields, seeing that made it felt very visible to me. But it is, and it's really interesting, the kind of range of different perspectives and attitudes, and lots of people kind of said, I still ate meat, and I saw my family were all kind of from the country or had a background in farming. It's a very, it's quite close to sort of Suffolk, and it's quite a kind of, one of the main economies there is agriculture, it's fishing and agriculture. So it's not, I think people that, would be aware of what the kind of farming system was, but there was something so personal about it being in their town. And I think there were real mix of motivations, but I think the main thing was seeing it at such a kind of close level. And feeling somehow responsible for it, that was the place where these animals were being sent off. And I think as well, these animals who were the animals that were being exported by Richard Otley, I think, had travelled quite a long way as well. So I think they were in a particularly bad condition, is the impression I get. So I think that was also kind of really brought it home to people. And I think around that time there'd been kind of other animal export protests as well. I know there were protests in Shoreham, and then there was some kind of, because they were being exported out to Belgium, and someone told me as well that there was kind of the solidarity, there was kind of a connection with people at the port in Belgium as well. So it's a really, but it is kind of incredible. It's kind of strange for some, that it just happened at that moment as well. But it's and as you say, the mid-90s, obviously the kind of campaigns around apartheid and things, kind of sort of, and then you have the poll tax protests. They're the kind of the ones that seem to stick out, that kind of more,
poll tax,
before those protests. But it is a kind of era which feels maybe less political.
Yes, I mean, I certainly, after children arrived, I was much more signing things than marching, I have to say, just for the logistical, time of it. I think the last big protest I went on was Greenham Common, which is, long time ago.
Yes, and that must have been incredible to be there.
It was amazing. It was amazing that the day there was one day we circled. The men ran the creche. They didn't have anything to do with the actual protesting, and we circled the entire camp, and we hung things on the fence that meant something to us. And at the end of the day, there were these ribbons and photographs and dummies and teddy bears and shawls and things that you didn't know what they meant, but there was this just kind of wall of really important things against this backdrop of aggression.
Wow, that's beautiful. And as you say, that idea of kind of storytelling as well being so powerful, that there were these stories on the fence. It's the anniversary this September, isn't it?
Yeah.
I saw that they're doing a kind of walk, and I was thinking I might take part to kind of memorialise it.
That would be wonderful.
Do you think that Greenham changed a lot in terms of female activism in the UK? Do you think?
Yes, I do. I think it came on the crest of the feminist wave. I think that was 83 we took, 81 it started, something like that. Yeah, I do. I think it had a big effect. But it was happening. You see, 1976 was the Equal Rights Bill. So from there on in, we had law on our side a lot of the time, to get a mortgage even. You couldn't get a mortgage before 1976. As a single female actor, they just laughed at me.
It's kind of unbelievable for me. Yeah. I can't imagine it. And I think that's something that I was really interested in the story as well, of honouring the work of all the women and sort of the feminist movement that came before, the current wave.
Yeah.
And I think that I think it'd be great to see more of that happening, of people reading up more and kind of learning as well. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me today, and just kind of the being able to see everything with that kind of clarity and all the kind of experience that you have, both the arts and activism, and for all your inspiring work with everything. Thank you.
Thank you. And here's to the next project.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to an episode of the Humane podcast, produced by True Name Productions and John Ainsworth. Original music by Ting Ying Dong.